So today we're going to be
Yeah.
talking about, we have 4 bullet points here. Number 1, why so many leaders struggle with flexibility. We know because we've been there. Number 2, what flexibility actually looks like for leaders. And number 3, how you can tell when flexibility is serving you and when it isn't serving you. And finally, how can you make practicing flexibility easier? So that's what we're going to be digging into today. We are sending out currently right now reminders. Jessie has her game face on.
Got this down.
And yeah, so we're going to dig in here. This is interesting. So I just got hey, Rochelle, I see you're watching. I just got a message from James saying, are you guys on yet? Or is the time flexible? Ha ha ha. Yes, it was. Yes, we are on. But for some reason, it doesn't seem to be notifying you. So hopefully you'll see here soon. I'm going to send him a message.
Sounds good. Yeah, I feel like Facebook Live has been very flexible in its notifications lately. It's like, maybe
I
sometimes we'll
know.
notify people.
Yeah, it's being a little, yeah, flexible. Unreliable, you might even say.
So, which is a great question. When does flexibility become unreliability? Let's just ask Facebook.
Right. Yeah. That is a good question, right?
Right.
Hi, Tanya.
Yes. Hello,
Welcome.
hello.
Glad you're
I'm trying to
here.
get my video so that I'm not at a weird angle. There we go. Okay. My headphone jack is at the bottom of this new phone, and so like when I stand it up, I'm all
Mhm.
tilty.
Yeah, so what I use for that is a box full of coasters, and it just sits in it, wedged to the side, awkwardly, kind of about to lean. And if I bump the table, everything falls.
Don't bump the table.
Don't bump the table. Yeah, when does flexibility become unreliability, right? So I think that's a really interesting question. And maybe it has to deal with when are people relying on you, right? Um,
Hmm.
you can't be unreliable if no one's relying on anything, including yourself. So I guess that's the key, right? Is like, and I think this really does lead into the discussion, because I think flexibility for leadership is by and large a judgment call on how important something is, or some aspect of something is. And
Hmm.
you cannot make everyone happy. That is impossible. Right? So
What?
yeah, so like knowing that, and knowing that there may be some disappointment, or there may be
Hmm.
um some letdown. How do we really tell when something is essential? I don't know. I feel like that's a
Yeah,
leadership skill, right?
right. Yeah, and it's hard because I feel like, well, first of all, I feel like it's something a little different for everyone. Like everyone draws their own line in the sand as to how flexible they are comfortable being. But I think we often draw those lines in the sand a little too quickly. Um, it reminds me of like, I think this was like 2 years ago when we were working on the website copy for Lacey Sites. Um, and we were in the middle of the project and we had a ton of client work all at the same time. And we were in the middle of our retreat in Vancouver. So we were doing a retreat, an in-person retreat, just the two of us. We were completely reframing our business, rewriting our business plan, and we had like 5 client projects going on at the same time, one of which was Lacey Sites, who happened to be our business coach at the time. And I remember having a conversation with her of like, don't worry, we'll get you your copy by X date. It's okay, we've got it, we've got it. And she was like, or you could just get it to me on Monday. Like, that's okay too. And Maria and I were like, wait, what? You mean? But we gave you a deadline. We have
Yeah.
to stick to the deadline.
We gave
Otherwise,
ourselves
we're
a deadline.
right. And that
Yeah.
and the flexibility she was giving us permission to have was butting up against our sense of what was being honest and what was being disingenuous with our commitments. And that was a hard line to look at and to be like, oh, are we being too hard on ourselves? should we just like graciously accept, oh, okay, we can wait until Monday? Like, it's just 3 more days. And I think we
Yeah.
did. And I think we felt weird about it.
Yeah. Well, Lacey, to be fair, pushed us to do a lot of things that we felt weird about, but ultimately we're really grateful to her for. Um, she's wise like that. Yes, she was the perfect client. Absolutely. So I think a lot of this goes back to that question that we talk about a lot here, right? Is like, what is the story I'm telling myself? Am I telling myself a story that if I go to a client and ask for grace and a little bit of an extension, does that make me somebody who, is not a solid worker, is not reliable, is not dependable, that flexibility ends up becoming flakiness, right? If I take off time for myself in the middle of the day, I know this is something you sort of struggled with, Jesse, in the past, is like, and maybe even now, right? Is like, if I feel like I need to be putting in 8 solid hours a day, but at 3 o'clock, I hit like an energy cliff. Like, why do I feel like I have to put in 8 hours every day? And B, why do I feel like those 8 hours have to be 9 to 5?
Yeah.
And if I do something else, does that make me lazy? Or does that mean I should like, maybe I'm outside of my own culture, right? Like, well, I've never practiced siesta before, therefore it's wrong, right?
Yeah. Yeah, Rochelle says the line where it becomes flakiness is fuzzy. I think you're totally right. And for me, I think what I've come to learn over the last couple of years is that it really is about your level of transparency. And if I have to move a deadline, I stick to the second deadline. It's not I move the deadline 5, 6, 7 times. That's when it starts to become more flaky. But if I'm being honest with myself and saying, okay, this project I need an extension on, I honestly think I can get it done in this amount of time, not being like, oh, well, I need an extension, so I'm going to give myself a 1 day extension when in reality I need like 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
Like, give myself the extension that actually makes sense and that I feel good about getting the work done in that time, and then sticking to that secondary deadline. And I mean, for some people, it might be 3 times. For some people, it might look a little different. But for me, that's what feels like I'm still taking care of myself, being flexible, but also not slipping too far into the flaky zone because I am still sticking to my deadline. It's just, you know, the scope of the project ended up changing. My energy levels ended up changing. Things happened, because life is a thing outside of work. So that's what has worked for me.
Totally. Hey, Jennifer, she says, I make sure to listen to my energy levels and plan tasks accordingly.
Yes.
Yeah, super smart. And
Mm-hmm.
in addition to promoting siestas, Tanya says that is the line, recommitting and fulfilling that second commitment. Rochelle says,
Yeah.
absolutely. If you act like a human, then people don't have a problem when you act like a human and need some
Yes.
grace. Right? Yeah, like if you sort of present yourself as this perfect deadline driven robot, and maybe you are deadline driven as a person, I am, but there have been times when
Mm-hmm.
I've asked for some grace, right? The problem, James says, for me is more results oriented. It's like if I get the work, sorry, it's hard for me to read those because I have to lean in really far and then I'm like all up in your face. It's like if the work doesn't get done, I don't get paid. So the work must get done or else.
Mm.
Um, True. And obviously, okay, so I think this leads to question number one. Why do so many leaders struggle with flexibility? I think a lot of
Yeah.
this is especially for leaders who are business owners, especially for those business owners who are the face of that business or the face of their thought leadership platform. It feels like our ego, our expertise, our reputation, whatever it is, and I don't mean ego in like an egotistical way, I just mean like the self, right? It feels like that's on the line. It feels like, if the business is flaky, I'm a flaky person. And there's some pride at stake right here, and there's some personal identity stuff, and yeah, because money, right? There's also money on the line a lot of the times. So all of those things are things that like, hey, we're business owners, I think, or leaders in general, I feel like by and large tend to be like pretty responsible folks, you know, and like
Mm-hmm.
they really like are people of their word and people who like really care about that stuff. And so all of a sudden when that starts to be threatened or knocked out of balance a little bit, the self kind of can come into play, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think when the money is a big part of the equation, there's this sort of, especially early on, or when you're still, even if you've been in it for a while, you're still kind of finding your stride. There's almost this sense of like you have to sort of stay at a running pace or a jogging pace to keep away from the scarcity that's behind you, from
Oh my
the,
gosh.
it's
The
the roller
like
coaster, right?
the
Yeah,
nipping
yeah, it's like
pack
Pac-Man,
of
right? You're
dogs,
like,
scarcity dogs
you,
chasing you.
exactly, yeah. They're chasing you, and you have to stay ahead of them, which means you have to work more, which means you have to be flexible less, not just with your clients, but also with yourself and your own needs and your own time and your own how you're spending your hours in your day. And I don't think there's one right answer to this, but I know what's worked for us has been things like raising our prices when it makes sense and not just to raise our prices. We actually just had a conversation, I think a week ago, where we were like, how do we feel about our prices right now? And we were like, actually, we feel pretty good about them. Like, usually every 6 months or so, we'll kind of reevaluate and be like, does it make sense to raise our prices or not? 2 years ago, when we were working with Lacey, our prices were so low that we needed to have 5 to 10 clients at any given time in order to make ends meet for our business, which was exhausting and made it harder to be flexible. We've raised our prices since then to a point where we need like maybe 3 or 4 clients that we have split up more, not economically, but like time economically between us and contract writers and all of that. So we've become better at managing our time. We've priced ourselves in a place that feels good to us, doesn't feel like we're, you know, asking an obscene amount of money, but it still feels like we're charging what our results are worth, and so that we can have a profit margin and sustain our business. But I
Yeah.
think the other thing is, because I know a lot of people like to have prices that feel very attainable for their clients, is like, okay, what can you do with that? Can you create a business model that supports that and bringing the money in so that you can allow for flexibility? I know for some people, for Rochelle, you've been building a membership. I know for other people, they have a lot of passive income that they work on their funnels and whatnot. And of course, all of it requires lead time, right? There's going to be a hustle time, but the goal is to have that opportunity for extended flexibility.
Yeah, and if you don't want to create passive income products and if you don't want to create a membership program or whatever it is right now, like you want to just keep doing what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
is there a way for you to set up sort of the expectations with your client a little bit differently, right? So that um, they pay 50% upfront just to get started and that's just the way it is, and then instead of like the rest due upon delivery, it's like the rest is due in 3 weeks regardless of whether the project is done or not, right? And like because you're a person of your word and it's in a contract that both of you have mutually signed, like it's getting done, right? So there's some stuff that can be done there even if you are completely like one-on-one, done for you, reliant, coaching, whatever, like, you know, service based, to make sure that like, hey, you know, the income's coming into the state and this is the way it is. And, you know, you can set up
Mm-hmm.
those boundaries, but also kind of give yourself the flexibility if like, you know what, the project just needs to be extended a week because whatever,
Yeah.
right? And that way, you know, the client knows that going into it, like, hey, these are my estimated dates of delivery, but like, you know, I'll
Yeah.
keep in contact. And I think what you said earlier is super true, right, Jesse, is like transparency and communication is key. And I think it makes sense for us to be having this conversation because we've been in this almost 8 years now, and have learned a lot of lessons around this just as business owners, but also it really does have to deal with like how you're communicating that, how you set up your messaging in the first place, like the
Mm-hmm.
expectations that you create based on the messaging that you're delivering.
Yeah. Tanya says, I feel that, at least with deadlines, the secret to flexibility is being honest with yourself, your times, and your life. There's nothing written that says you can't commit to a deadline that includes 1 or 2 extra days just to prepare for any unexpected events. The clients are always happy when they get to the work earlier. Yeah,
Truth.
totally. I mean, build in those days for yourself. And then how much more amazing do you look when you're like, oh, but I got it done earlier because those life events didn't come up.
Right. Yeah. Or you just had a super productive day or felt really
Yeah.
inspired, right? Um, yeah. And Rochelle says, yeah, it's definitely a balancing act. What you want for what you're doing to get it. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. That is a balancing act. There is a little bit of a balance to strike there. I think that's absolutely right. So any other reasons that you guys want to share that you've struggled with flexibility, or if there's anything else that's coming up for you, Jesse?
Mm. I think the biggest thing that's just coming up for me is that it's an ongoing practice, and I'm constantly running up against new moments where I didn't realize how inflexible I was being.
Mm.
And I'm constantly being tested in those ways. And just like anything else, just like we're reading in the book club with Brene Brown's book, The Gifts of Imperfection, this idea of like, it's not about ticking the boxes. It's not about being like, and now I'm a flexible person. It's about the journey
And
and the path. Right. Yeah. There's no and done. Like maybe I have more flexibility around client deadlines now, but there are other things that I'm less flexible around that I'm still working through. And once I'm done working through those things, there's going to be another thing. And that's just part of the leadership journey. We're always working through these things at a different level, but we're still working through the things.
it's a practice, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Really good point here, Tanya. There's also flexibility regarding how you do things. And
Yeah.
Rochelle, this is
I
exactly what
mean,
I
what
was
I'm
just
working on.
thinking, right? Like being aware of your inflexibility, right? So like I know like we've talked about this in the past, Jesse, right? How like both of us will have like expectations for something, but like they're in our heads and we're not actually communicating them. And then when things are not aligned with our expectations, we're like really disappointed or frustrated or like whatever, angry. Like there's all sorts of feels that can come up around that.
Mm-hmm.
And like taking a look at that and seeing like, okay, well, like going into it, can I sort of see what my expectations are so that then like I can maybe explore other options and see how that would feel and like explore this possibility of flexibility now. um,
Yeah.
and just be aware of those like crystal ball projections that we're putting on things that like, guys, we cannot see the future. Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean we can't still have like, anticipatory thoughts or, reasonable expectations based on past events or whatever, past experiences. But like when that becomes a recipe for inflexibility, I think that absolutely can be super tough.
Yeah, totally. And I think that this obviously goes beyond business. This is like a daily life practice too. Where are we being flexible or inflexible in our day-to-day life, in our conversations with our partners or our friends or our family, in the things that we do outside of our business? Because of course, we are whole human beings, not just business owners. And the leadership traits that we practice as business owners are practiced in other parts of our life as well. So like if you have kids, what is your flexibility with your kids? Or inflexibility. If you have a partner, how are you flexible or inflexible in your relationship and how you maintain it? I
Mm-hmm.
think these are big questions. I mean, not like ones we can necessarily get to in this hour, but things to think about, definitely.
Yeah, and one of the things that stuck out to me in the masterclass that Rachel and Kyle Wright just recently did, um, it was about how to have conversations about anything in your relationship, but like really about anything, anywhere. And a lot of people were like, well, what do I do if like my boyfriend just isn't going to have this conversation with, or like, what do I do if like my wife always does this? And they were like, well, remember that like you have to give them grace and like not assume that like you're taking a new approach now and so they've never actually encountered you with this approach, but also b like
Mm-hmm.
we've got to give them benefit of the doubt and like not assume that like something's going to happen and therefore don't even try something new, right? And
Yeah.
so yeah, like it's kind of like shocking when like a mirror comes up and we see our own inflexibility that's like we've trapped it so much in our own minds and expectations that like we haven't even voiced it or even acknowledged that it is an inflexibility. which really holds us back, right? Like in that relationship scenario, totally holds us back. But I think it does also in terms of business, in terms of thought leadership, in terms of, you know, how we work with our team members, whatever it is. Like, this is one of those things that Jesse and I talked about before, where like, you know, we last year we hired an ad and funnel strategist, and we were like, okay, we want this and this and this and this. And she was like, okay, and did the thing. And then by the end, we were like, maybe we should have asked her, like, since she's the expert, like, what we should be doing, or like if she had any recommendations. Like, we just, it didn't even occur to us that we were being inflexible until like 3 months in.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the more we have experiences like that, the more cognizant we are, and the more we can check ourselves before we go into the next experiment, especially if it's a similar one, right? So the next Facebook ad strategist we hire, we're going to go into that relationship with a mind of like, okay, what do you think?
Yeah.
Let's meet at the table and come up with something that makes sense for everyone while we're relying on your expertise, and you can lean into our expertise so that we get the best possible outcome.
Right. Which I think gets us to our second bullet point here, which is, what does flexibility in a leader actually look like? I think that's a lot of it, right? Is coming to the table and empowering the people around us. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Okay. I want to read a few of these before we dive into that. So Tanya says, you mentioned
Okay.
priorities earlier. I'm convinced that we can be very flexible around how we get to those priorities without canceling or changing them. Absolutely. That there's many possible paths from point A to point B, and only seeing that one path that we've like walked so many times, we've created a rut there, doesn't mean there aren't other paths we could create or that already exist. Right.
Yeah.
Super true. We are our friends, our own enemies. Absolutely. James, my flexibility with kids is never having them. Mm-hmm.
Fair.
Good luck.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I really like that, Tanya, that we are our own friends, our own enemies, because I think we're
Mm.
both often. Um, and obviously, we want to lean more on the friend side, and we strive to lean more on the friend side. And I think the enemy part kind of sneaks up behind us sometimes without us even realizing it. And then it's a matter of like making friends with the enemy and just like acknowledging that part of you and not shoving it back, which is what I did for years, was like, this is just how I am, in my rigid,
Right?
inflexible way.
Yeah.
But then when it was like, okay,
Deal with
let's
it.
actually like, right, yeah, like I am just inflexible. That is life. Done. Turns out that doesn't work very well. But once we're willing to have a conversation with that part of ourselves and dive into it, and yeah, make friends with the enemy and understand it, because usually that inflexibility, it comes from somewhere. It comes from something. It comes from a story we've told ourselves, or an experience we've had, or a reality that we've been in that has then extended beyond its use, and now is just sort of existing and corrupting our present in different ways. And so until we look at it and talk to it and uncover it and understand it, we can't undo it. We can't rewrite it. And so I think that's a really important piece of it.
Maybe. I remember we were just chatting with Chelsea recently, right? And she was saying, like, yeah, you can do that. This is a money mindset coach that we're in a peer mastermind with. She was saying, like, yeah, we can go that path of the understanding. But the faster path may actually be just to sort of like rework it and rewire it. And maybe it's coming up with a mantra, or maybe it's coming up with an intention, or whatever it is, but just like catching yourself in that, and just committing to changing it, right? Like, I don't necessarily have to like dig into like the scarcity or the fear or the like rejection or whatever it was that caused the story run inflexibility in the first place in order to change it. It may be helpful,
Yeah.
that sort of integration piece, right? But I don't know if it's always
Yeah.
necessary.
Well, I think it depends on your goal, right? And it depends also, I think you can make that decision, right? You can make that decision to rewrite the story and just like move forward with the new story. But depending on how integral that story is to who you are,
Mm-hmm.
depends on whether you feel that need to really dive into it or not. Because some things, like that are this is like a super surface level example. Like I stopped drinking pop years ago, soda for all of you
Until you're around me.
non-customers. Until I'm around you, you break me every time. But I decided, like, I grew up obsessed with Dr. Pepper. Like, I would keep 24 packs of Dr. Pepper behind my seat in the car. And because I lived in Ohio, it was always cold. So I'd have a nice cold Dr. Pepper right behind my seat.
Yeah, I was like, they're going to be hot and gross. It's because I grew up in the South.
No. I'd go through like cases in a week. And I would have my friends over and I'd buy cases. I was like a Dr. Pepper addict. And then I went to college and I decided I'm going to stop drinking pop. I just decided like it's bad for me. I don't want to have as much sugar. I'm done. And so I stopped. And I didn't untie my story of pop addiction or whatever. I just decided to stop. And it wasn't important to me to dig into that story of how, like, you know, it was a social thing for me. It was like, you know, hanging out and having a sleepover with your friends and like that's what you do. And like, yeah, sure, there's stories there, there's cultural things there, there's all of that, but it wasn't important for me to dig into. On the other hand, things like my personal money mindset, yes, I can make the decision to change it. Yes, I have made decisions to change it. And I've moved forward from those decisions, but I still feel the need to periodically reflect back and see what caused that initial gut money mindset reaction. And one of the things that Chelsea said that really, really stuck with me, and I've repeated it to like 10 people since she said it, is you cannot choose your first thought, but you can always choose your second. And that like, oh, that struck me.
Yeah.
And I want to know why my first thought is my first thought. And that's just like my natural, maybe inflexibility or maybe curiosity. I guess it depends on what lens you look at it with. But I want to know why my first thought is my first thought, but then I'm still choosing my second.
Right, for sure, for sure. Yes, this is absolutely tied in with Tanya's congruency system. If you guys are not familiar with it, I highly encourage you to follow her. She has a great Facebook community. Make sure I have the name right here. It's called Owning. Yeah, Own Your Decisions. Is that correct? Making sure I got the right one.
Yeah, that's it.
Yes, Own Your Decisions. Okay, make sure I give it right. Where she digs into this and like how to actually practice it in life. And I think it's super relevant to like, I feel like everything I do, but also this conversation. And speaking of, she says, I feel that as leaders, we have even more responsibility in doing that. Leadership is about helping others find their stories and rewriting them. And I think, right, like we can't do that unless we are familiar with the practice and we even recognize that like what hold stories may have over our own actions, our own inclinations, right? So even if we aren't taking the time to dig into like why we are quitting Dr. Pepper, because I refuse to say P-O-P in the context of soda, but yeah, it's you know, we could dig into that. And I think also many of us recognize that there are many sort of painful experiences or fear-based experiences or whatever it is that like have created those stories for us. So even if we're still in the journey, and I think many of us, most of us are still in the journey of like exploring that stuff and figuring out sort of what we can do from there, you know, we can still help other people with it because we understand that this is part of the process, right? So another thing I want to dig into around this, what does flexibility look like in a leader? So I've had so much fun just like thinking about and like really integrating, there's that word again, what we learned from Adrian, Dorison, and Tyler Brandon when we were working with them on their Run Like Clockwork copy. So for those of you guys who don't know this, Adrian and Tyler have started a consultancy with the blessing of at least Mike Michalowicz, who, if you guys have hung out with us for a while, you know, we're like big old profit first evangelists, and he's the author who wrote that book. He has a new book coming out called Clockwork. It's called Design Your Business to Run Itself, something like that. in any case, the consultancy is all about like how to do that, right? Like the book walks you through some stuff, but if you want like the real concrete steps and some guidance for your particular situation, that's what Adrian and Tyler are doing, because they have a lot of experience with all of this, right? They come from systems and processes backgrounds, and this is their zone of genius. So one of the things that really stuck with me though, working on that project, was around how we treat the people who work with us, like our team members, and making sure that we do create, like, we need to be flexible enough and like let go of things enough to allow others to feel empowered around what it is that they're doing. When we go to somebody and say like, hey, I need you to make like 18 copies of each of these 400 sheets of paper, like that is soul sucking, right? But if it's like, hey, I like really want you to be able to create a really cool, informative experience for our new clients. You can have, the copy machine, you can have any materials you need, like just, whatever, let me know what you need. But like, you have ownership of that process. Like, how much more empowering is that? They may still be making all of those copies, right? But like, that's going to be like a joyful part of the job, as opposed to just like oh my gosh, if I have to push this big green copy button again, I'm going to hurt someone, right?
Yeah. I think that brings up a really important part around what flexibility looks like for a leader, which is the control thing,
Mm-hmm.
the big control thing. In the terms that you just said of like, okay, let your team member be responsible for the outcome and let them, like you were saying earlier, Tanya, with the path can be different. Let them choose their path to that outcome. Don't make them walk your path to that outcome, because you'll get subpar results and you won't have a committed team. They're not going to be as invested as they would be if they could follow their own creative path to that same destination. But I think this applies internally too, to ourselves as the CEOs of our business or leaders of our business, as far as like flexibility around things like our own internal idea of what a outcome is, or what it looks like, or
Yeah.
how long it takes. I mean, our challenge, okay, we were going to start this challenge in what, a week, 2 weeks? We
Mm-hmm.
decided, we need more time. And that's not just because we need more time to get the materials together, although that's part of it. It's also, we need more time to like wrap our heads around what this means, what we really do want that end point to look like, how we want to involve other people in it, and just what we want it to feel like for people who are going through that experience. And in the past, we've just put a date on the calendar and been like, we're going. Full steam ahead,
Yeah.
we are going, we're going to make it work. We don't care how many
Hell
people
or
end
high
up
water.
getting in.
Yeah.
Right, we're just going to do it. We're going to deliver awesome material. And this time we're giving ourselves space to breathe. Even though it meant, last week we said it here in our Facebook group, we said we have an announcement, and the announcement was there's this thing that's going to happen, and it's not going to happen when we originally planned, but it's going to happen eventually.
The
But the
announcement was,
announcement was basically like,
hold on.
yeah. Which is
Right.
fine. Like, yeah, James,
Yes.
also your book launch, you pushed it back, which made total sense for you in order to put out the best possible product, which is also totally in line with your brand.
Yeah.
If you had rushed your deadline, you would have actually been inauthentic to the brand that you are promoting. So it actually like is the best kind of flexibility.
Which I
And
also feel like is one more reason you, of all people, especially, I think, can
yeah.
have that flexibility to say, like, you know what? This project for my client needs to be extended. And like,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Yeah.
they worked with you for a reason and not like Bobby churn them out, right? So like I
Bobby
don't know where that
Turnabout.
came from. Uh,
Yeah, which would have been the height of hypocrisy for me.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important, James, is that we also take time periodically to reconnect with what our brand is, what our leadership platform is, and what it is that are the values we're promoting, and to make sure that we are not in our inflexibility actually going against those values without
Right.
realizing it.
Totally. Totally. Totally stealing it. Go for it. Bobby churn him out.
You
All
have
right.
full rights to Bobby.
We release all intellectual property there. I like your comment here, Tanya. That's beautiful. Everybody chooses their path. That's the difference between a leader and a lion tamer, right?
Ooh.
Because man, let lions be lions, right? I mean, absolutely. I just laughed across the room getting my coffee. Good, good. I'm just glad you didn't
I'm
laugh while
glad we're
drinking your
entertaining.
coffee because that could have
Yeah.
been disastrous. It's
Yes.
well timed.
Yes. So anything else that comes to mind when you think about what flexibility looks like in leadership?
Yeah, so feel free to post that in the comments, and we will continue riffing on that. But in the meantime, let's move on to bullet point star number 3. When flexibility is serving you and when it isn't, and how we could actually tell. Yeah. So I think we've talked a lot about how inflexibility isn't serving you, right? Like when it's holding you back, or when it's like causing you to get into this like deadline panic, or this like we have to do it this way because that's the way it's always been done. How many times have we heard that in like corporate meetings, right? So I think we've talked a lot around that. But what we haven't talked around so much is when inflexibility actually can serve you. And I think for me, a lot of this is around our values, right? Like we can have very clear boundaries in terms of our values. And when something is crossing that boundary, that's a moment where we can be inflexible. So, for instance, one of the reasons we have discovery calls with clients is to make sure that they feel like they're a good fit for us and they're like a yeah client, as opposed to like a super red flags client. In fact, we just got another reminder recently, didn't we just see that like that scarcity and red flag clients equal sad people, whereas heck yes clients equal repeat clients, lots of fun, and like yay, life is good and we like our business. And so like being really clear on the values that like we want to bring to the table, but also that we really want our clients to reflect, for that to feel like a really good client for us. Like that's something we try to be really inflexible around. And when we are flexible around it, we usually end up regretting it.
Yeah. Rochelle says inflexibility can sometimes equal boundaries. Yeah. And I think that's the better word for it, right? Is what are the boundaries that we're holding firm to? Because in holding firm to them, we are further supporting ourselves, our vision, our mission, our values, our sense of well-being, all of those things that we need to have in order to grow in a sustainable way and not just either burn ourselves out or just get tired and annoyed with what we're doing because we're not doing it in integrity. Rochelle says red flag clients, even in retrospect. Yeah, sometimes you don't know they're a red flag client until after the fact, but there are things you can do to mitigate that, and things that like we've put in business, not just our discovery call, but we also have an inquiry form that people fill out for copy that's fairly lengthy. So it's like if you get through that form, you really want to work with us, and we, because of the questions we ask, get a pretty good sense of who you are. And then the discovery call kind of adds another layer to that. So we can be like, okay, we feel okay working with you. We feel like this is a good match. It's a good personality and expectation match. Whereas other times it's not. And we're like, sorry, but we can refer you out to other people.
Yeah, I mean, even this Facebook group, right? Like as soon as Facebook started allowing us to have sort of vetting questions for a free Facebook group, I mean, this isn't like these are the people that like we're spending every minute of every day with because we're like going to in-person retreats with every single one of you every single second. Like that's not what's going on here. But like even there, we have a boundary around it, and it's like if you don't fill out the questions, you're not getting in. I will say there are a few exceptions where it's like people that like we know for whatever reason and like we've already had a conversation around it. Cool. But like if it's someone we don't know, if you don't answer the questions, sorry. That's, like that's just one of the boundaries we've set up, because we want people who are willing to take the time and energy and tell us a little bit about like their innovative idea or like whatever it is, right? Like we want to know.
Yeah, and we want to protect this space too. Yeah, it's a free space, but it's a free space where we hope that you guys all feel comfortable coming and sharing and asking for advice and all of that good stuff. And if you can't be bothered to fill out 3 real quick questions, then you're not going to be able to be bothered to participate and
Yeah.
be an active part of the group. And yeah, I mean, there's room for lurkers too. I mean, Lord knows I lurk in enough groups, but
Me
at
too.
least taking that initial step of, yes, I want to be a part of this community goes a long way.
Hmm. And it's true, like the groups that I've joined where there's like an expectation of participation, like I could tell you the groups off the top of my head and I know which ones they are. And it kind of like weighs on me when I'm being a lurker in there. And I'm like, okay, I need to go back in there and be participatory. As opposed to like the other groups that I'm in, that like, there is no expectation of that. Like, okay, then I will just lurk. That's just the way it
Mm-hmm.
is. So yeah, I think like, and again, I think again this goes back to that topic of messaging. And like when we put our expectations out there really clearly, when we delineate them, when we know our own boundaries, and then create lines around that for people, it's not a pin, it's guiding, like guideposts, right? And it allows people to sort of
Yeah.
understand like what to expect going into something. People don't love going into a national forest with no trail. Like, yeah, you want to be out there in nature and yeah, you want to be enjoying stuff, but like most people don't want to be bushwhacking. They want to be on a trail so that they like feel safe and they like have expectations. They know that like, okay, I'm going to hike this for 3 miles, but like when I do, I'm going to be at a beautiful lookout. Like people want to kind of know what the lay of the land is, right? So we can provide that for people through our messaging.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. And that doesn't mean, for those of you who run groups, that you have to have like participation standards. We don't require participation in our group for a reason, because we want to produce the content that encourages you to participate naturally if you feel called to. And we use the questions entering the group as a sort of litmus test as to whether we think that you will be an asset to the group, whether you're participating or lurking. And James, you're exactly right. Some months are more lurky than others, and we want to
Mm-hmm.
give people the grace to have months where they're super active and months where they're like, I got to peace out, guys. I have life and work happening, and that takes priority right now. And that's
Yeah.
cool. We all do that. Um, I do think that flexibility, so when we're talking about how flexibility serves and doesn't serve you, I think the how to tell piece, I hate to say a lot of times it's a gut feeling, but a lot of times it's a gut feeling. Like we were talking about that flakiness thing before, and I think I know when I'm flaking out. Like I know when I'm pushing deadlines back multiple times and they're not for the right reasons. I know when I'm pushing back internal deadlines, because that happens more. I really rarely push back client deadlines, but we push back internal deadlines all the time, or don't get to something, or push it off, or decide to do something else because it's more fun. And like, you can feel it. You're like, okay, I know I should be doing X, but I'm doing Y instead because it just seems more fun right now. And I think that's when flexibility gets sort of dangerous, because if you keep doing Y and never get to X, like what if X, for the longest time, X for us was active lead generation. Well, that's a problem if you don't have active lead generation in your business. Like that,
Yes.
you need that.
Yes.
So that flexibility where I was like, oh, but I could be hanging out in Active Campaign and scheduling automations or writing a new landing page, or, whatever felt fun to me and was fun. Great. Schedule some time for that. Make some time for the fun, because you don't want business to be a drudgery, but you still have to do the thing that's going to bring clients in. You still have to
Yeah.
do X if you want to do Y.
And if it's feeling super heavy all the time, then like maybe get some help around it or see if there's
Yeah.
ways to inject some fun into it. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're not saying here like don't do self-care, guys. Like that's not at all what
Yeah.
we're saying. It's just to the point of like once we're avoiding something
Yeah.
that we like know needs doing, that's the point
Mm-hmm.
at which we either need to like figure out if the thing really needs doing, or figure out a more fun, engaging way to make it happen.
Yeah.
And that may be like sending it to someone on your team to help with or something like that too,
Mm-hmm.
right? I fight so much with my fears here, but I know it's not flexibility, it's clearly avoiding, right? So it is that gut
Ooh, yeah.
thing I think it's a gut thing for people who are invested in like self-development and self-leadership. If you're new on that journey and you frequently sort of lie to yourself or kind of brush things under the proverbial rug without being aware that you're doing it, that may be a little harder for you to have that check-in.
Yeah.
I know it was for me just a few years ago, even because I wasn't really aware of when I was like telling myself a story or lying to myself. I didn't really even know what that meant. And had a lack of self-awareness around that. So I think this does become easier with more mindset practices. Absolutely.
It makes me think of, okay, have you watched the new season of Queer Eye?
I watched the first episode the other day. I just finally was like, everyone's watching Queer Eye.
Because it's amazing. If you've watched the new season, drop a comment. So I just watched an episode the other night. I'm not through the full season. I'm almost done with it. And the guy that was sort of selected to be made over and everything was a chronic liar. And essentially, he was like 22, 23 years old-ish. And he had just walked in his college graduation, but he hadn't actually graduated because he had failed one class. And he had told his family he graduated. He'd done the walk. He'd had the like graduation party. And so the guys come in and they like point to a diploma on the wall and they're like, "Is that your diploma?" And he's like, "No, it's my roommate's." They're like, "Oh, but you graduated, right?" And he's like, "Yeah, I totally graduated." And they're like, "So where's your diploma?" And he's like, "Oh, well, you see, there was this thing and it was just like a misunderstanding with the professor, but like I totally graduated. I just have to talk to him." And they're like, "So did you talk to him?" He's like, and then they keep going on and on and on and digging deeper and deeper and come to find out he never went to class. So he didn't pass the class. So he doesn't.
That silly professor had a misunderstanding.
Right. Yeah. And so, but he had told that lie so much that he had started believing it himself, and it just flew out of his mouth immediately on camera that he knew was going to be like put out to the world. And that was just one instance, and it happened like 10 times over like 10 different topics throughout the course of the episode. He was just chronically lying because he was in such a place of embarrassment over where he was in life, and that he didn't even realize he was embarrassed over where he was in life. He was just coming up with these like excuses to cover things up so that he wouldn't have to make the decision to move forward. And I think that's that early stage you're talking about, Marie, where it's like you don't even realize the hole that you're digging for yourself.
You're just trying to avoid the short-term pain, right? The short-term, whatever it is, embarrassment, whatever. That was me. Yeah. I did this in third grade and got majorly called out for it because I was not a superiorly sophisticated liar, fortunately. Embarrassed. And I think the main thing about it was like my potential embarrassment actually, because I did that, actually became not only my embarrassment once it became revealed, but also embarrassment for my mom because she stuck up for me and I was lying to her. And so I think that was most of it, is like I realized that like all of a sudden now not only was I feeling the pain that I was trying to avoid, but also I caused like pain for no reason for someone I loved. That's when I was like, okay, that I can't. And it's not that I never told another lie necessarily, but I think I was really, that really made a huge impact on me. And I feel like ever since then, I've been a pretty honest person. If anything, I just omit, right? So, which, is still questionable, but it does kind of come down, like we're not everyone's there at that place where like a gut check-in, a self check-in is like going to reveal what's really going on.
Yeah, and I think when that's the case, the way to trick yourself into figuring it out is by asking yourself why X is happening, and then digging into the layers of the why. I mean, that's what happened in the episode, right? That the guys just kept asking this person, okay, what does that mean? Why are you saying that? What does that mean? And just getting deeper and deeper until finally the truth came out. And you can do that with yourself, right? You can say, okay, I'm choosing to work on the CSS of my website instead of find clients. Why am I doing that? Well, because it's fun. Why am I doing it when it's fun, when I know that it's not going to bring clients in? Like what is the draw there? well, because I'm avoiding it, because I'm afraid I might not get clients, I'm afraid it might not work, it feels hard, it feels heavy. There are so many reasons that can come up, but only after we ask those questions if we haven't made the practice of it. And so I think this is where things like journaling come in, right? Like, if you happen to be a journaler, if you're not a journaler, maybe talking to someone, or, you know, finding a way to really dig in and build that muscle so that you can trust your intuition more, because not all of us are naturally intuitive. I mean, I always consider myself like a thinker and not a feeler. That's what I always tell everyone, but that's not true. It's just that my intuition muscle needed to be strengthened when I first started saying that to people, and I have strengthened it over the past few years.
Yeah, trusting yourself with it. So Jesse and I actually did an activity last Thursday. Hi, Linda. Glad you're here. We did an activity last Thursday. It wasn't about avoidance. It was about digging into, like, sort of grounding ourselves in our why. And we did this activity back and forth where, like, I just asked why a bunch, or why not. And it just, like, I had a sort of initial questions to just, like, start the conversation. And then it was almost like interview style, but like rapid pace, so that Jesse didn't really have time to think about the responses. And then I was just kind of scribbling like high level notes that came in, and then we swapped places. So I think that activity, that why activity, is really helpful for digging into the meat of something, regardless of, you know, whether it's a story around inflexibility or that's causing inflexibility or something else, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that, I think, is a good step for making practicing flexibility easier. So, which is our last topic of the day.
Right. Yeah. And I think there are a lot of different things, but I think that's the first step, right? Is just getting to the place where you can trust your intuition and understand where those, you know, gut reactions are coming from, so that you can make the best second thought or second decision possible, because you can't control the first thought. I think another step to making practicing flexibility easier is to practice it. If you happen to be a very inflexible person, like I was, the actual act of reaching out to a client and asking to extend a deadline by 2 days, the actual act of moving a challenge date back, of here's something we're really, I tend to be really inflexible about, the number of emails we send to our list each week. We used to send 5 emails a week, Monday through Friday. If we did not have all the emails written, I was like, we got to get them written. We got to send them out. Otherwise, our audience is going to, I don't know what.
Implode.
Yeah, like what? Like nothing. And then we missed some emails and nothing happened. I made the conscious decision once, I'm not going to write a Tuesday email this week. Oh my God, nothing happened. Like, it was fine. Now we've actually backed off because we were overwhelming our list with emails. We write 3 emails a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Last week, our Friday email didn't go out.
Today, I had a moment. Our email didn't go out.
Today, our email didn't go out. I had a moment last week, and I was like, we didn't send a feature Friday. Oh no.
His very life depends on our email schedule, Jesse.
It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's totally fine. And now the next time we have to skip an email, I will be even more fine with it, because I've practiced doing it in the past. Even though the first time it was just like, I don't know if I can do this. And I was like, okay, it's fine. It's okay. Like, that is totally a self-imposed thing. People are not going to forget who I am. People are not sitting at their desk, like, eagerly awaiting our email to enter their inbox. Like, that's not real life. Like, just chill out.
Sorry, guys. Apparently, I need to be more flexible with my caffeine intake or sleep schedule. Yes. And I think another piece of it is surrounding ourselves with people we trust, right? So whether this is our mentors, peers, just people in our community, our team members, whatever that is. I think there was a great list of people in the Brene Brown book, right? I think pretty much almost everybody watching this is reading that book with us right now. Sort of a list of things your friends, like, things, if somebody does this, they're not necessarily worthy of, like, hearing or witnessing, like, the shame reveal, right? But I think a lot of this is actually true for many things like trying to fix it without actually just, like, listening. Guilty, right? things like one-upping you, where you're like coming to somebody and you're like, I need to uncover this. Like, I need to talk through this. And they're like, that's awful, but that's nothing compared to the time that da da da. And like, it's meant to be like, hey, it's okay. Cause like, you know, it could be worse, but like, then that doesn't actually help at all. Like, so,
Right.
you know, there's sort of characteristics of people or behaviors of people that, see, there goes my phone. Behaviors of people, I bumped the desk, that like it's not necessarily helpful for this. They can still be a friend, they can still be, you know, a dear family member, whatever it is. But when it comes to like digging into this stuff and like digging into our stories, looking at like how we're setting up sort of expectations of flexibility within our messaging, whatever it is, there's certain people who are sort of like just more prepared to hear that and to support us in that process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important making sure that you surround yourself with the right people. Rochelle says, and when it really doesn't feel fine and you've done the work to know why, then you know it's important. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
exactly.
Yeah.
And another thing up here that Tanya was saying, I really like, maybe flexibility is part of the safe, worthy value mindset. Yeah, because I think we do have to feel those things, right? Before we can really feel safe being flexible, before we can
Yeah.
like still feel like we're worthy of whatever, right? But still also practice flexibility. Like that's so true, right? And so a lot of this really is grounded in mindset work, which like we'll be the first to tell you this is not our zone of genius. This is something that we're students in very much.
Yeah.
And it's something that we're learning and practicing and delving into for ourselves. Don't get us wrong, we are not mindset coaches. There are other people actually even listening to this call who are much more adept at that, and able to sort of find those things. But we recognize how important it is and how interwoven it is with our leadership development, right? And it's just, you can't extract it. It's critical.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, guys, if you're looking for someone to continue this conversation with, Tanya is an amazing resource for you here in this group, in her group, Own Your Decisions. I really liked, Tanya, what you said the other day when we kind of posted our theme of the week. You said, when I think of flexibility, I think of water, a force with a direction, yet flowing in harmony with the land that contains it, and also able to shape that land, right? Also able to create these amazing formations and these amazing changes in the landscape through its flexibility, but through the pure force of it. I think that's a really powerful metaphor because we do have that choice, right? We can be flexible within the constraints of being in integrity and having boundaries, and we can balance the two of them.
Yeah. So I think that's a perfect note actually to kind of wrap this up on. Thank you all so much for being here for this. Sorry we went over a little bit, but you know, we also started a little late. So thanks for being flexible with us today and sticking with us here to the end. Such an important topic. Thank you guys for honoring us and our flexibility always, and know that we honor you and yours, and we honor your journey to sort of being able to sort of assess what's going on within you so that you can figure out the why behind the flexibility or the inflexibility and continually build that practice. Because you're right, Jesse, this is not one of those things that we practice it once and we're done. We're now a flexible person, right? I mean, even in terms of our bodies, right? Like if you want to stay flexible, you got to keep stretching, you got to keep whatever, right? Like we lose that. And it's the same with our behaviors.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you so much for joining, and we hope to see you next week right here, same time. Not sure what the theme is yet. We're going to write that this week because we're being flexible about how this month turns out.
Exactly.
So we'll talk to you guys, and you know where to find us if you need us. So
yes. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.